The mining station Kepler 442b hung in the void like a dying star, its lights flickering against the endless black of space. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the observation deck window, watching the massive industrial complex slowly rotate. 3 months. 3 months since the Galactic Mining Consortium had declared the station economically unviable and ordered its evacuation. Everyone had left. Everyone except her. The decision to stay hadn't been easy. Elena's crew had begged her to come with them when the last transport departed. Her commanding officer had threatened court-martial. Her family had sent desperate messages from Earth, pleading with her to abandon this godforsaken rock floating at the edge of civilized space. But Elena couldn't leave. Not when she knew what lived in the deepest tunnels of the mining complex. The creature had been discovered 6 months ago, during the final deep excavation attempts. The miners had broken through into a vast underground chamber, and their lights had illuminated something that shouldn't have existed. A Wyrm. Not the legendary dragons of Earth's ancient stories, but a real creature that resembled them in the most terrifying ways. 50 meters long, covered in scales that seemed to absorb light itself, with a head the size of a small shuttle. And it was completely blind. The mining crew had panicked. Weapons were drawn, evacuation alarms sounded, and, within hours, the entire incident was classified by the consortium. Official reports claimed the chamber was empty, just another dry excavation that yielded nothing valuable. But Elena had been there. She had seen the creature cowering in the corner of its cave, trembling as the bright mining lights overwhelmed its sensitive hearing. While everyone else saw a monster, Elena saw something else entirely. She saw an animal that was terrified, alone, and trapped in a place it couldn't escape from. The Wyrm's movements weren't aggressive, they were defensive. Every gesture spoke of fear, confusion, and a desperate desire to hide from the chaos that had invaded its ancient home. The other miners wanted to kill it. The consortium wanted to study it. But Elena saw the way the creature's great head turned toward sounds, the careful way it moved through its chamber without crashing into the walls. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was an intelligent being that had adapted to a world without sight, and now found itself suddenly exposed to creatures it couldn't understand. When the evacuation order came, Elena made her choice. She volunteered to stay behind as a security monitor, claiming she needed to oversee the final shutdown procedures. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She couldn't abandon the Wyrm to die alone in the darkness. Now, 3 months later, she was the only human left on a station designed for 3,000 people. The automated systems kept the life support running, but everything else was shutting down piece by piece. The hydroponic gardens had withered. The recreational areas stood empty and silent. Even the ever-present hum of the mining equipment had faded to whispers. But Elena had found a new purpose in the solitude. Every day, she made her way down to level 47, the deepest accessible point in the mining complex. The journey took 2 hours through increasingly dark corridors, past abandoned work sites and empty storage bays. She carried a small pack with her, food, water, and, most importantly, a portable speaker that played soft classical music. The first time she had approached the Wyrm's chamber after everyone left, Elena had been terrified. Not of the creature itself, but of what she might find. Would it be dead? Dying from starvation or stress? Would it attack her on sight? Instead, she found the Wyrm exactly where it had been 3 months ago, curled in the far corner of its vast cavern home. The creature's breathing was slow and steady, its massive form rising and falling like a mountain in gentle earthquake. When Elena's footsteps echoed in the chamber, the great head lifted immediately, ears pricking forward with startling alertness. That first encounter had been purely observational. Elena sat at the entrance to the chamber for 6 hours, just watching and listening. The Wyrm never approached, but it never tried to hide either. Occasionally it would shift position, and Elena marveled at how such an enormous creature could move with such grace and silence. The worm's scales seemed to shift color in the dim light, flowing from deep black to dark purple to midnight blue, like oil on water. The breakthrough came during her 5th visit, when Elena accidentally knocked over her water bottle. The small crash echoed through the chamber, and she cursed under her breath. But, instead of retreating, the Wyrm made a sound she had never heard before, a low, melodious call that seemed almost curious. Without thinking, Elena called back, "Sorry about that. Just clumsy." The Wyrm's head had turned directly toward her voice, and, for the first time, Elena realized the creature was trying to communicate. Over the following weeks, a strange routine developed. Elena would arrive each day and announce herself with the same phrase, "It's just me again." The Wyrm began responding with its own sounds, different tones and pitches that Elena started to recognize as greetings, questions, or simple acknowledgments. She began talking to the creature about her day, her life, her fears about being alone on the dying station. The Wyrm, she discovered, was an excellent listener. Elena learned to read the creature's moods through its body language. When she spoke about happy memories from Earth, the Wyrm would relax, its massive form settling more comfortably against the cavern floor. When she talked about her worries or the loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed her, the creature would make soft rumbling sounds that felt remarkably like sympathy. It was during the 7th week that Elena made her boldest move. Instead of sitting at the entrance to the chamber, she walked 10 steps closer to where the Wyrm rested. The creature's head lifted immediately, tracking her movement with obvious attention, but it made no threatening gestures. Encouraged, Elena sat down in her new position and continued her usual one-sided conversation. The Wyrm listened as always, but this time it did something new. Slowly, carefully, it began to move closer. The process took almost an hour, with the creature pausing frequently as if asking permission to continue. Elena forced herself to remain calm and keep talking, even as her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and terror. When the Wyrm finally stopped, its great head was less than 20 meters away. Elena could see details she had never noticed before, the intricate patterns in its scales, the way its nostrils flared as it scented the air, the surprising delicacy of its facial features. The creature's eyes were clouded white, clearly sightless, but they turned toward Elena with unmistakable intelligence. That was the day Elena realized she wasn't just keeping the Wyrm company. The Wyrm was keeping her company too. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened in ways Elena couldn't have imagined. She began bringing small gifts, pieces of music played on her speaker, interesting textures for the Wyrm to investigate with its sensitive snout, even simple games that relied on sound and touch rather than sight. The creature responded with its own offerings, carefully arranged stones that created pleasant echoing sounds when Elena walked among them. Elena started calling the Wyrm Echo, both for its obvious reliance on sound and for the way it seemed to reflect back the emotions she shared with it. Echo appeared to enjoy the name, making a pleased rumbling sound whenever Elena used it. The real test of their friendship came during Elena's 10th week alone on the station. A routine check of the life support systems revealed a critical failure in the atmospheric processors. Without immediate repairs, the entire station would become uninhabitable within days. The problem was located in the deepest part of the complex, far below Echo's chamber, in areas that required specialized equipment and expertise Elena didn't possess. She had two choices: activate the emergency beacon and wait for rescue, abandoning Echo forever, or find another solution. Elena chose the third option. She decided to ask Echo for help. The idea seemed insane even to her. How could she explain complex technical problems to a creature that had never seen a computer or understood human technology? But Elena had learned that Echo was far more intelligent than anyone had suspected. The Wyrm had demonstrated problem-solving abilities, emotional sensitivity, and a deep understanding of spatial relationships that could only come from a sophisticated mind. Using a combination of words, gestures, and simple drawings scratched into the cavern floor, Elena began to explain her situation. She drew maps of the station's layout, showed Echo the routes to the damaged equipment, and tried to convey the urgency of the repairs needed. Echo listened with the same focused attention it always gave Elena's words, but this time the creature's responses were more complex. The Wyrm began making its own marks in the soft earth of the cavern floor, creating patterns that looked almost like diagrams. It took Elena several hours to realize that Echo was showing her alternative routes through the station, paths that Elena didn't know existed. The Wyrm, it seemed, knew the mining complex better than any human ever had. Echo's knowledge made sense once Elena thought about it. The creature had lived in these tunnels for who knew how long, mapping every passage and chamber through sound and vibration. While the human miners had only explored the areas they needed for their work, Echo had navigated the entire underground network, including natural caves and passages that connected to the artificial tunnels. Over the next 3 days, Echo guided Elena through a maze of forgotten passages and ancient caverns. The Wyrm couldn't physically accompany her to the damaged equipment, but it provided detailed directions through a combination of sounds, gestures, and even crude maps drawn in the dirt. Elena found herself crawling through spaces she never knew existed, following Echo's guidance toward the critical repair sites. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Elena had to jury-rig solutions with limited tools and spare parts, working by dim emergency lighting in areas where the station's main power had already failed. But every time she returned to Echo's chamber to report on her progress, the creature's obvious concern and encouragement gave her the strength to continue. On the 4th day, Elena successfully restored the atmospheric processors. The station's life support systems stabilized, and the immediate crisis passed. But, more importantly, she and Echo had become true partners. The human and the Wyrm had worked together to solve a problem that neither could have handled alone. That evening, as Elena sat in Echo's chamber celebrating their success with a small meal and some of the creature's favorite music, she realized something profound had happened. She was no longer a human taking pity on an abandoned alien creature. She and Echo were friends, equals who had chosen to care for each other in a universe that had left them both behind. The mining station continued its slow death spiral around the distant star, but Elena no longer felt alone in the darkness. She had found something more valuable than any or the miners had ever extracted from these tunnels. She had found a connection that transcended species, language, and even sight itself. As Echo settled down for the night, making the soft rumbling sounds that Elena had learned meant contentment and trust, she made a decision. When rescue finally came, and she knew it would come eventually, she would not leave Echo behind. Somehow, someway, she would find a solution that allowed them both to find new homes among the stars. The Wyrm had chosen to trust a human. Now the human would prove that trust was not misplaced. Outside the chamber, the station's automated systems continued their endless cycle of maintenance and monitoring, keeping the last 2 inhabitants alive in their pocket of warmth and friendship in the cold depths of space. Elena pulled her blanket closer and listened to Echo's steady breathing, planning for a future that just hours ago had seemed impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve together. But, tonight, neither human nor Wyrm was alone in the darkness. They had each other, and, in a universe full of empty space and dying stars, that was everything. 6 months had passed since Elena first saved the station's life support systems with Echo's help, and their friendship had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined. The mining station had become their shared world, a place where human ingenuity and Wyrm wisdom worked together to solve problems that would have been impossible for either species alone. Elena had learned to navigate the station's corridors with the same silent grace that Echo used in the tunnels. The Wyrm had taught her to rely on sound and touch, to feel the vibrations in the metal floors that warned of failing systems long before any monitor could detect them. In return, Elena had shared her knowledge of the station's technology, using simple demonstrations to show Echo how the various machines and computers worked. Their communication had grown far beyond the basic exchanges of Elena's early visits. Echo had developed a sophisticated vocabulary of sounds, gestures, and even scratched symbols that allowed for complex conversations. Elena had learned to read the subtle movements of the Wyrm's head, the different tones of its vocalizations, and even the way its scales shifted color to express different emotions. But their peaceful existence was about to be shattered. Elena first noticed the signs during her routine monitoring of the station's external sensors. Ships were approaching from the inner systems, not the rescue vessels she had hoped for, but military cruisers bearing the insignia of the Galactic Mining Consortium. The same organization that had classified Echo's existence and ordered the station's evacuation was returning, and Elena doubted they were coming to check on her welfare. The lead ship was the GMC Extractor, a massive mining vessel equipped with excavation equipment that could strip mine an entire asteroid in days. Following behind were 3 smaller ships that Elena recognized as research vessels, the kind used for xenobiological studies. Her blood ran cold as she realized what they intended to do. The consortium hadn't forgotten about Echo. They were coming to claim their prize. Elena raced down to level 47, her heart pounding as she considered her options. The approaching fleet would arrive within hours, and she had no way to hide Echo or disguise what had been happening on the station. The evidence of their partnership was everywhere: the modified tunnels they had worked on together, the communication symbols carved into cavern walls, the obvious signs that both human and Wyrm had been thriving in their isolation. When she reached Echo's chamber, the Wyrm immediately sensed her distress. Its great head lifted from its resting position, and the creature made questioning sounds that Elena had learned meant, "What troubles you?" "We have a problem," Elena said, forcing her voice to remain calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Ships are coming. Bad ships. They want to take you away." Echo's response was immediate and unambiguous. The Wyrm's scales darkened to deep black, and it made a low sound that Elena had never heard before, a rumbling growl that spoke of ancient fury and determination. The message was clear: Echo would not go willingly. But Elena knew that resistance would be futile. The consortium ships carried enough firepower to reduce the entire station to scrap metal, and they wouldn't hesitate to use it if they met opposition. Worse, she had spent enough time studying corporate law to understand Echo's legal status. As far as the Galactic Council was concerned, the Wyrm was property of the mining consortium, a xenobiological asset to be studied, exploited, or disposed of as the company saw fit. The next few hours were a desperate race against time. Elena and Echo worked together to hide the evidence of their partnership, covering the communication symbols and disguising the modifications they had made to the tunnels. Elena moved her personal belongings back to the upper levels, trying to create the illusion that she had never ventured into the deep chambers where Echo lived. But even as they worked to conceal their friendship, Elena's mind was racing through possible solutions. There had to be a way to protect Echo without triggering a confrontation that would get them both killed. The answer came to her as she was sealing off one of the modified passages, and it was so audacious that she almost laughed. If the consortium wanted to claim Echo as property, Elena would beat them to it. Not through legal ownership, but through something far more powerful: official recognition of Echo's intelligence and rights as a sentient being. The plan required perfect timing and no small amount of deception. Elena returned to the station's command center and activated the emergency communication array, sending a priority message to the Galactic Council's Xenobiology Department on the consortium's own emergency frequency. She identified herself as a senior researcher conducting classified intelligence studies on behalf of the mining consortium, and requested immediate consultation on the legal status of a newly discovered sentient species. The message was carefully crafted to sound like routine corporate procedure while actually triggering a cascade of legal protections that the consortium couldn't easily override. Once the Xenobiology Department was officially involved, any action against Echo would require extensive review and approval from multiple galactic agencies. Elena's gamble paid off in the most dramatic way possible. The Xenobiology Department's response arrived just as the consortium fleet was entering the station's docking range, and it contained exactly what Elena had hoped for: a formal order temporarily suspending all activities involving the reported sentient species pending a full investigation. The consortium commander's fury was obvious even through the static-filled communication channel. Captain Marcus Webb had clearly expected to conduct a simple retrieval operation, not deal with galactic bureaucracy and legal complications. But Elena's message had painted him into a corner. He couldn't touch Echo without violating a direct order from the Council, but he couldn't leave either without fulfilling his mission directives. The solution Webb chose was predictable and ruthless. If he couldn't take Echo by force, he would take Elena instead. "Captain Vasquez," Webb's voice crackled through the station's speakers as his ships docked with the main airlocks. "You will accompany us for debriefing regarding your unauthorized activities on this station. Prepare for immediate departure." Elena had expected this. She had also prepared for it. Instead of reporting to the docking bay, Elena made her way to Echo's chamber one final time. The Wyrm was waiting for her, clearly aware that something momentous was happening. The creature's scales had shifted to a pattern Elena had never seen before, swirling silver and blue that seemed to flow like water across its massive form. "I have to go away," Elena said, kneeling beside Echo's great head. "Bad people are here, and, if I don't go with them, they'll find ways to hurt you." Echo's response nearly broke Elena's heart. The Wyrm made a series of soft, questioning sounds that clearly meant why? "What did we do wrong?" "We didn't do anything wrong," Elena said, reaching out to touch the warm scales of Echo's snout. "We did something right. We proved that different species can understand each other, can care for each other. But some people are afraid of that." The conversation that followed was the most complex communication Elena and Echo had ever shared. Using their full vocabulary of sounds, gestures, and symbols, Elena explained what was happening and what needed to happen next. She told Echo about the legal protections she had triggered, about the investigators who had come to study their situation, about the hope that someday they might be reunited. Echo listened with the focused attention the creature always gave to Elena's words, but this time there was something different in the Wyrm's posture. As Elena spoke, Echo began moving around the chamber in a careful pattern, touching specific points on the walls and floor. It took Elena several minutes to realize what the creature was doing. Echo was creating a record. The pattern of touches, scratches, and even carefully placed stones told the story of their friendship in the Wyrm's own language. Elena watched in amazement as Echo documented their first meeting, their shared work on the life support systems, the games they had played, and the quiet moments they had spent together. The entire chamber became a three-dimensional chronicle of interspecies cooperation and mutual respect. When Echo finished, the creature returned to Elena and made a sound she recognized as determination mixed with hope. The message was clear: their story would survive, even if they couldn't be together to continue it. Elena's communicator crackled with an angry transmission from Captain Webb. His patience was running out, and his threats were becoming more specific. Elena had to leave, but she couldn't bear the thought of abandoning Echo to an uncertain fate. That's when Echo surprised her one final time. The great Wyrm moved to a section of the chamber wall that Elena had always assumed was solid rock. But, as Echo pressed against specific points, a hidden passage opened, a tunnel that led deeper into the planet's crust than any human excavation had ever reached. The passage was large enough for Echo to move through comfortably, but too small for mining equipment or research vessels to follow. Echo looked back at Elena one last time, and, in that gaze she saw something that took her breath away. The Wyrm wasn't just showing her an escape route. Echo was making a choice to trust that Elena's plan would work, to believe that hiding was better than fighting, and to have faith that their friendship meant enough to ensure they would meet again. Elena pressed her face against Echo's warm scales one final time, breathing in the familiar scent that had become synonymous with home and safety. "I'll come back for you," she whispered. "I promise I'll come back." Echo's response was a soft rumble that Elena had learned meant "I believe you." The Wyrm disappeared into the hidden passage with the same silent grace it had always possessed, leaving Elena alone in the chamber that had been their shared sanctuary for so many months. She could hear Captain Webb's security team entering the station's upper levels, their heavy footsteps and shouted orders echoing through the corridors like an invasion. Elena took one last look at the communication symbols Echo had carved into the cavern walls, memorizing every detail. Someday, when the legal battles were over and the investigators had done their work, she would return to this place. She would call out, "It's just me again," and Echo would emerge from the darkness to greet her with the soft sounds that meant friendship and trust. But, for now, Elena had to play a different role. She had to become the captive researcher, the confused human who needed extraction and debriefing. She had to pretend that her time on the station had been lonely and difficult, not the most meaningful months of her life. As she made her way to the upper levels to surrender to Captain Webb's forces, Elena carried with her the memory of Echo's final gesture, the way the Wyrm had touched her hand with its snout, a gentle goodbye that promised reunion rather than farewell. The consortium might take her away from the mining station, but they couldn't take away what she and Echo had built together. Their friendship had proven that intelligence and compassion could transcend any barrier of species, language, or circumstance. More importantly, it had created legal precedents and documentation that would protect Echo and others like the Wyrm for generations to come. Elena emerged into the station's main corridor to find herself surrounded by armed security personnel in consortium uniforms. Their leader, a stern-faced woman with captain's insignia, gestured for Elena to raise her hands. "Captain Vasquez, you're under arrest for violation of corporate property laws and unauthorized research activities. You'll be transferred to the flagship for questioning." Elena raised her hands as ordered, but she couldn't keep a small smile from crossing her face. These people had no idea what they were really dealing with. They thought they were capturing a lone human who had gone slightly mad from isolation. They had no concept that they were interrupting the most significant xenobiological partnership in galactic history. As the security team escorted her toward the docking bay, Elena caught one last glimpse of the passage leading down to level 47. Somewhere far below, Echo was waiting in darkness that no longer seemed empty or threatening. The WYRM was waiting for a friend to return, just as Elena was planning to keep a promise that meant more than any corporate directive or legal complication. The game was just beginning, and Elena intended to win it, not through force or deception, but through the simple truth that love and understanding were stronger than fear and greed. She and Echo had proved that different species could choose to care for each other. Now Elena would prove that such choices could change the galaxy itself. The mining station grew smaller in the viewport as the consortium fleet departed, but Elena's resolve only grew stronger. She was leaving Echo behind, but she was also carrying their story forward to a larger stage where it could make a real difference. The WYRM in the darkness was no longer abandoned. The human in custody was no longer alone. And, somewhere in the space between species and, across the vastness of the galaxy, their friendship continued to grow. 2 years had passed since Elena was taken from the mining station, and those years had been a whirlwind of legal battles, scientific conferences, and political maneuvering that would have seemed impossible during her quiet months with Echo. What had started as a simple friendship between human and WYRM had evolved into the most significant xenobiological case in galactic history. Elena stood before the Galactic Council's Supreme Court, wearing the formal blue robes of a certified xenobiological rights advocate, a title that hadn't existed before her case brought it into being. Across from her sat the full legal team of the mining consortium, 12 of the galaxy's most expensive corporate attorneys who had spent 2 years trying to prove that Echo was nothing more than an intelligent animal with no legal standing. Behind Elena, in the public gallery, sat beings from dozens of species who had traveled across the galaxy to witness this historic moment. The case of Vasquez versus Galactic Mining Consortium had become about far more than one human and one WYRM. It had become a test of whether the galaxy was ready to expand its definition of personhood and rights to include species that didn't fit traditional patterns of civilization. But Elena's mind wasn't on the packed courtroom or the historic implications of the trial. She was thinking about a promise made in a dark chamber 50 light-years away, and whether she would finally be allowed to keep it. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Elena's first year in consortium custody had been a nightmare of interrogations, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings designed to discredit her testimony about Echo's intelligence. The corporation had painted her as a lonely woman who had anthropomorphized a dangerous alien creature, creating an imaginary relationship to cope with isolation-induced mental illness. The strategy might have worked if Elena hadn't been prepared for it. During her months with Echo, she had carefully documented their interactions, creating detailed records of the WYRM's communication abilities, problem-solving skills, and emotional responses. More importantly, she had taught Echo to document their relationship in ways that other scientists could verify and understand. The breakthrough came when the Galactic Council's xenobiological team finally gained access to the mining station for their own investigation. Led by Dr. Kethvar, a renowned Altarian researcher who specialized in non-vocal communication, the team descended to level 47 expecting to find evidence either supporting or debunking Elena's claims. Instead, they found something unprecedented in the history of galactic science. Echo had been busy during the 2 years since Elena's departure. The WYRM had expanded the communication chamber into a vast three-dimensional archive that told not just the story of their friendship, but the entire history of Echo's species. Using techniques that Dr. Kethvar later described as artistic historical documentation beyond anything achieved by known civilizations, Echo had created a record spanning thousands of years. The archive revealed that the WIRMs were not primitive cave dwellers but the remnants of an ancient spacefaring civilization that had chosen to retreat underground when their sun began to die. They had adapted to life without sight not through evolutionary pressure, but through conscious choice, developing enhanced senses that allowed them to perceive the universe in ways that sighted species couldn't imagine. Echo's individual story was equally remarkable. The WIRM was not just intelligent but incredibly old, over 300 standard years, and had been the keeper of their people's history and culture. When the mining operations broke through into the traditional WIRM territories, Echo had been the sole survivor of a community that had died from diseases brought by off-world contact. Dr. Kethvar's team spent 6 months documenting Echo's archive and attempting to establish communication with the WIRM. Their success was limited but significant enough to convince the scientific community that Elena's claims were not only true but dramatically understated. Echo wasn't just an intelligent alien, the WIRM represented an entirely unknown branch of galactic civilization with technologies and perspectives that could revolutionize xenobiological understanding. The political implications were staggering. If Echo's testimony was accepted by the courts, it would establish legal precedent for recognizing intelligence and rights in species that didn't conform to traditional definitions of civilization. Every mining operation, every planetary development project, every expansion of known space would have to consider the possibility that they might be displacing or destroying sentient beings who had chosen different paths of development. The mining consortium fought the recognition with every resource they possessed. Their argument was simple and terrifying: if the courts ruled in Elena's favor, galactic expansion would become legally impossible. Every unexplored planet, every asteroid mining operation, every research station would require extensive xenobiological surveys that could take decades to complete. The economic impact would bring interstellar civilization to a grinding halt. Elena understood the opposition's concerns, but she had seen something they hadn't. She had lived with Echo for months, had worked alongside the WIRM as an equal partner, had experienced firsthand what was possible when different species chose cooperation over exploitation. The galaxy wasn't facing a choice between expansion and stagnation, it was being offered an opportunity to grow in ways that neither humans nor any other known species had imagined. The trial itself had lasted 8 months, with testimony from hundreds of witnesses and experts. Elena had spent weeks on the stand describing her relationship with Echo in detail, answering increasingly hostile questions from the consortium's attorneys who tried to portray her as delusional or intentionally deceptive. But her detailed documentation and the supporting evidence from Dr. Kethvar's team made it impossible to dismiss her testimony as fantasy. The most powerful moment had come when Elena was allowed to present Echo's own testimony to the court. Through a combination of recorded sounds, translated symbol patterns, and holographic displays showing the communication archive, Echo told the court about WIRM history, culture, and philosophy. The presentation lasted 3 days and left even the most skeptical observers with no doubt that they were witnessing communication from a profoundly intelligent being. Echo's message to the court had been simple but revolutionary: the WIRMs didn't want to stop galactic expansion or interfere with other species' development. They wanted recognition of their right to exist and choose their own paths, and they wanted protection for other species who might be facing similar situations. Most importantly, Echo wanted to continue the partnership with Elena that had proven such cooperation was possible. Now, as Elena stood before the 5 Chief Justices of the Supreme Court waiting for their decision, she thought about the small communication device in her pocket. If the ruling went in their favor, she would finally be able to activate it and send a message across 50 light-years of space to a friend who had been waiting patiently in the darkness. Chief Justice Veltar, an ancient Centaurian whose career spanned over 200 years of galactic law, rose to address the court. The chamber fell silent as beings from across known space waited to learn whether the galaxy was ready to expand its understanding of intelligence and personhood. In the matter of Vasquez versus Galactic Mining Consortium, Veltar began, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. This court has been asked to determine whether the being known as Echo possesses sufficient intelligence and self-determination to qualify for recognition under galactic sentience laws. Elena held her breath. Everything came down to this moment. after extensive review of the evidence, including direct communication from the being in question, this court finds that Echo demonstrates not only individual intelligence but represents a previously unknown form of collective consciousness that has preserved knowledge and culture for millennia. The evidence clearly establishes that Echo and others of its kind possess not only sentience but a sophisticated understanding of ethics, history, and social responsibility that equals or exceeds that of any known galactic species. The courtroom erupted in cheers from some sections and groans of dismay from others, but Veltar wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds that the relationship between Captain Elena Vasquez and the being Echo represents a new model for interspecies cooperation that offers unprecedented opportunities for mutual understanding and growth. Rather than viewing different forms of intelligence as obstacles to galactic development, we must learn to see them as partners in expanding our understanding of what civilization can become. Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the implications of the ruling sank in. They had won. Not just the legal battle, but something far more important, they had changed the galaxy's understanding of what was possible between species. But Veltar had one more surprise. This court hereby orders the immediate establishment of the Interspecies Cooperation Institute, with Captain Elena Vasquez as its first director and Echo as its co-founder. The purpose of this institute will be to facilitate communication and partnership between different forms of intelligence, ensuring that the galaxy's expansion serves all sentient beings rather than just those who follow traditional patterns of development. Elena activated her communication device with shaking hands and sent a message she had been composing for 2 years. Echo, it's Elena. I'm coming home. We won. The response came back within hours, transmitted through quantum relays across the vast distances of space, a complex pattern of sounds that Dr. Kethvar's translation algorithms interpreted as "Welcome back, friend. I have new stories to share." 3 weeks later, Elena stood once again in the chamber on level 47 of the mining station, but everything had changed. The station was now officially designated as the Interspecies Cooperation Institute's primary research facility, with funding from the Galactic Council and protection under the same laws that govern diplomatic missions. Echo emerged from the hidden passages with the same silent grace Elena remembered, but the Wyrm scales now shimmered with patterns of silver and gold that spoke of joy and excitement. Their reunion was everything Elena had hoped for, a moment of pure connection between friends who had changed each other's lives and, in doing so, changed the galaxy itself. But the reunion was only the beginning. Within months, the Institute had established contact with 17 other non-traditional civilizations, including deep ocean dwellers on Tethys Prime, crystalline collective intelligences in the Vega system, and energy-based beings living in the coronas of dying stars. Each contact followed the model Elena and Echo had established: patient observation, careful communication, and mutual respect leading to partnership rather than exploitation. Elena found herself traveling across the galaxy as the Institute's director, but she always returned to the mining station and to Echo's chamber. The Wyrm had become not just her friend but her partner in a mission that was reshaping galactic civilization. Together, they developed new protocols for first contact, new technologies for interspecies communication, and new legal frameworks for protecting the rights of all sentient beings. The mining consortium had been right about one thing: the galaxy's expansion had slowed dramatically. But it had been replaced by something far more valuable: expansion of understanding, compassion, and cooperation that was creating a truly inclusive galactic community for the first time in recorded history. On quiet evenings, Elena would sit in Echo's chamber just as she had during those lonely months before the consortium's return. But now she knew their friendship was part of something larger, proof that love and understanding could bridge any gap between species, and that choosing to care for each other was the most powerful force in the universe. Echo would settle beside her with the same contented rumble that had once comforted a lonely human on a dying station, but now that sound carried new meaning. It was the sound of a promise kept, a friendship that had changed the galaxy, and hope for a future where no sentient being would ever have to face abandonment in the darkness. The stars outside the station continued their ancient dance, but they no longer seemed cold and distant. They were destinations where friends waited to be discovered, partners in the great work of building a galaxy where every form of intelligence could find its place and its purpose. Elena reached out to touch Echo's warm scales, just as she had on that first day when she chose to stay behind rather than abandon a frightened creature to loneliness and death. That choice had seemed small at the time, but it had proven that sometimes the most important decisions were the ones that came from the heart rather than the head. "Thank you," she whispered to her friend in the darkness that was no longer dark, "for teaching me what it means to truly see." Echo's response was a gentle sound that needed no translation, a rumble of contentment that spoke of friendship, trust, and the infinite possibilities that opened up when different beings chose to love each other across the vast spaces between stars. The abandoned mining station had become the most important place in the galaxy, not because of the minerals in its tunnels, but because of the friendship that had been forged in its depths. And, in that friendship, both human and Wyrm had found something more precious than any treasure. They had found each other, and, in finding each other, they had found a way to light up the darkness for everyone.